Imagine a world where silence was your only weapon, where one wrong breath could mean a whip across your back, or a bullet through your chest. In the year 1847, on a plantation deep in the swamps of Georgia, there lived a woman whose silence spoke louder than thunder. Her name was Clara, a name whispered in the dark, carried in secret prayers, and remembered in fearful respect. But history nearly erased her story. Tonight, you will hear it. Tonight, you will walk the road she walked, a road of blood, of shadows, of chains, and of freedom. But before freedom, there was fear. Before thunder, there was silence. And in that silence, Clara learned something the world was not ready to hear, that even the quietest voice, when it refuses to bow, can shake the foundations of an empire built on chains. This is not just a story. This is a warning. This is a confession. This is the tale of the woman they called Silent Thunder. Clara was born under a crescent moon, her first cry swallowed by the heavy night air. They said she was born silent, not crying for hours after her birth, and some of the elders whispered that she was touched by something greater, that silence would either be her curse or her weapon. On the plantation, every child born into bondage was given a number before they were given a future. Clara was number 27. But to her mother, she was flesh and blood, a tiny heartbeat wrapped in rags. The plantation was not just a place of work. It was a prison. The air itself carried the smell of sweat, iron, and gunpowder. The sound of the overseer's boots striking against the wooden planks was enough to silence even the birds in the trees. And every child grew up with the same lesson carved into their minds: speak less, obey more, survive at all costs. Clara's world was small, but her eyes were sharp. At 7, she could tell the difference between the sound of a whip hitting the earth, and the sound of it tearing into flesh. At 9, she learned how to lower her gaze so the overseer would not notice the fire in her eyes. At 12, she learned that silence was not just survival, it was resistance. But Clara was different. While others whispered in the cabins after dark, she listened. She listened to the wind carrying stories of rebellion from distant fields. She listened to the old ones speak of Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey. She stored these words like hidden weapons, sharpening them in the dark. The day would come when silence would no longer be enough. They say chains are made of iron, but Clara knew better. The heaviest chains were the ones no one could see. They were the whispers planted in your skull, the lies you were forced to repeat until you started to believe them. You are nothing. You are property. You are born to serve. These words dug deeper than any shackle, and Clara had heard them since the day she could walk. The plantation was a world of rules written in blood. Rules that turned human beings into shadows. You could not look a white man in the eye. You could not speak unless spoken to. You could not run, not even in your dreams. They tried to teach Clara that silence meant obedience. But Clara's silence was different. Her silence was a storm waiting for thunder. By day, she bent over the cotton fields, her fingers bleeding as she pulled thorn after thorn. Her back bent not just from work, but from the weight of watching others beaten into the dust. She learned to breathe quietly when the overseer's whip cracked in the air, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had taught her to hide behind silence. At night, when the cabins went dark, Clara's mind did not sleep. She replayed every scream she had heard, every face she had seen dragged away, every story whispered in the dark. It was as if the walls of her skull were carved with shadows she could not escape. And yet, in that darkness, Clara found a weapon. Silence sharpened her memory. She remembered every path across the fields, every sound of dogs barking in the night, every shift of the overseer's boots. She learned to count the stars above the cabins, to track the moon's climb across the sky. Where others saw only hopeless nights, Clara saw a map. But silence was not easy. Silence meant swallowing your screams when your back split open under the lash. Silence meant biting your tongue when hunger clawed at your belly. Silence meant watching your brothers and sisters dragged away to be sold, while your own heart begged you to cry out. The overseers thought her quietness meant submission. They didn't know it meant resistance. Because every unspoken word was stored inside Clara like kindling, waiting for the strike of flint. The greatest cruelty of slavery was not just the whips or the chains. It was the voice inside your head that whispered, "You will never be free." It was the way they tried to make you doubt your own worth, to shrink you until you became smaller than your own shadow. Clara fought that voice every night. She fought it with the memory of her mother's hands, rough and scarred, but warm when they touched her cheek. She fought it with the old prayers whispered under breath, the ones that carried more power than the overseers would ever understand. She fought it with silence, and silence gave her strength. There were moments when she almost believed the lies. When hunger gnawed at her belly so hard that she forgot the taste of real food. When the screams of the lash grew so loud that they drowned out her own thoughts. But in those moments, Clara remembered one thing: thunder never begins as thunder. It begins as silence. It begins as clouds gathering in the sky, heavy and unseen, waiting to break. Clara was a storm in the making. And the chains of the mind could not hold her forever. Rebellion never begins with a roar. It begins with a whisper. And on the plantation, whispers were dangerous things. A whispered hymn at midnight. A whispered plan traded between trembling lips. A whispered story about someone who had run and never been caught. Clara began to notice them. The small sparks. A girl who left rotten food at the master's door, pretending it was fresh. A boy who let the horses loose in the field, knowing it would delay work for hours. An old man who sang forbidden songs in a tongue older than chains. Each act was tiny. But together, they lit something in Clara's chest that no whip could put out. There was one night that changed everything. Clara sat outside the cabin, watching the stars, when an older woman named Ruth leaned close and whispered, "Do you know why the North Star shines so bright?" Clara shook her head. Ruth smiled, her teeth glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Because it shows the way. Follow it long enough, and it will take you to freedom." That night, Clara could not sleep. She imagined the star tugging her northward, pulling her through forests and rivers. The thought was dangerous. To dream of escape was to risk your life. But the thought would not leave her. She replayed every punishment she had seen, every friend lost to the slave markets, every whip that cut into her skin. And the thought of running began to outweigh the fear of dying. Fear is a powerful chain. But hope is a key. And once you hold the key, the lock never looks the same. The weeks that followed were heavier than ever. Clara kept working in the fields, her hands bleeding, her back breaking. But now she carried something the overseers could not see, a secret fire. She listened more closely than ever. She mapped the sound of dogs barking, the guards' footsteps, the moments of silence between their rounds. She studied the land the way a sailor studies the sea. But storms do not gather without warning. Clara's silence became sharper, and others began to notice. A young boy asked her one night, "Clara, why do you stare at the stars so much?" She answered with a smile. "Because the sky never lies." Inside, her heart was pounding. She was planning. The thought of freedom had grown too large to ignore. Every day she didn't run felt like another death. The overseers thought they had broken her, but they didn't see the thunderclouds forming behind her eyes. The night before her escape, a storm raged across the land. Rain pounded the roofs, lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled like drums of war. Clara sat in her cabin, staring at the door. Her pulse matched the thunder. This was her moment. She whispered to herself, "Silent thunder. Silent thunder." And in that whisper, she gave herself a name. Clara would no longer be the quiet girl bent under chains. She would be Silent Thunder. And the storm would cover her flight. Midnight. The cabin door creaked open. Clara stepped into the storm. Rain soaked her skin, mud swallowed her feet, but her silence was her shield. She ran past the field she had worked her whole life, past the barn where whips hung like weapons, past the house that had owned her name. Every step was a defiance, every breath a blade cutting through fear. Behind her, the plantation slept. But not for long. A dog barked. A man shouted. The storm had not silenced everything. They were coming. Clara ran into the woods, the trees closing around her like walls. Branches cut her face, thorns ripped her dress, but she did not stop. She followed the star, that single point of light through the storm. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, but the voice inside her head kept whispering, silent thunder, keep running. The chase was merciless. The dogs drew closer, their howls cutting through the night. A gunshot cracked. Clara dove into the mud, her heart slamming against the earth. She lay still as the hunters passed, their torches glowing like fireflies in the dark. When the forest swallowed their light, Clara rose and ran again. Faster. Quieter. Stronger. For days, Clara ran. She slept in ditches, drank from streams, and ate whatever roots or berries she could find. The hunters did not stop. Word spread quickly when a slave escaped. Rewards were posted. Patrols scoured the roads. Clara knew she could not trust anyone, not the farmers, not the travelers, not even the preachers. Some would turn her in for a coin. Others might kill her outright. But not everyone was an enemy. There were whispers of safe houses, of people who believed in freedom more than in fear. And one night, Clara found them. A family risked their lives to hide her in their barn, feeding her bread and milk, wrapping her in a blanket. For the first time in years, Clara slept without hearing chains. When she woke, the woman of the house pressed a hand to her shoulder and whispered, "Keep going north. Don't stop." The journey was long, and every step was a gamble. But Clara carried something more powerful than fear now. She carried thunder in her chest. She carried freedom in her eyes. And the hunters could never catch thunder. Weeks later, Clara crossed into free land. Her body was broken, scarred, starved, and trembling. But when she stepped onto that soil, she felt something she had never felt before. The air smelled different. The ground seemed lighter. And the chains inside her mind cracked open. Clara collapsed to her knees, tears mixing with the dirt. She was free. She was alive. She was silent thunder. But freedom was not the end. Clara dedicated her life to helping others escape. She became a guide, a whisper in the night, a shadow moving across the land. To the world, she was a ghost. To the enslaved, she was salvation. They said if you saw her eyes in the dark, you were already halfway free. Clara's story is not just one woman's flight. It is the story of defiance, of silence turning into thunder. She began as a shadow, but she became a storm. And her storm still echoes today. Because every act of courage, every whisper of rebellion, every step toward freedom, is thunder rolling through history. She was not born silent thunder. She chose it. And in that choice, she became more powerful than the chains meant to break her.